Well, this talk was put together for the NAIN convention, North American Interfaith Network convention, that we just had August down in San Diego. And the theme of the talk was harmony, journey to one heart, one heart. And I got to thinking, what exactly do they mean by one heart, one heart? And I also got to thinking about the current president and the climate in the U.S. about immigration and racial issues that are happening down there. And as I was talking to Paula just a few minutes ago, it's not confined only to the U.S. We had an immigration rally here as we were talking in January, and I kind of think that the climate of intolerance towards different people that seems to be prevalent in the U.S. now is spreading. It's in Europe, and it's even making its way up here to Canada. So today I want to talk about differences between people. And so I adopted the motto for the U.S., E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And I want to use that motto, E pluribus unum, as sort of the theme for my talk. And the kind of one that I want to talk about, E pluribus unum, out of many, one, is not a one that's all the same. I want to talk about a one that's made up of variety and difference, pluralism, as we hear a lot in Canada, not sameness. And I'd like to introduce my talk with some quotes from my own tradition, the Swedenborgian tradition. And you have them, the quotes, in the handout I gave you. First of all, there's that short quote from Divine Providence number 4. Swedenborg uses philosophical language. A form makes a unity more perfectly as its constituents are distinguishably different and yet united. So a unity is more perfect when its constituents are distinguishably different and yet united. And then there's that rather lengthy quote that really deals with interfaith among Christians. Swedenborg writes, in the Christian world, doctrines are what distinguish the churches. And from them, people call themselves Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Calvinist, or the Reformed and the Evangelical, and by many other names. Hi, come on in. It is from doctrine alone that they are so called, which would not be at all if they would make love to the Lord and charity towards the neighbor, the principal things of faith. The doctrines then would only be varieties of opinion respecting the mysteries of faith, which truly Christian people would leave to everyone according to his or her conscience, and they would say in their heart that one is truly Christian when he or she lives as a Christian, or as the Lord teaches. And then he has that beautiful vision. Thus, from all the different churches, there would become one church, and all the dissensions which exist from doctrine alone would vanish. Yea, the hatreds against one another would be dissipated in a moment, and the Lord's kingdom would come upon the earth. That's from Heavenly Secrets, number 1799. So here he talks about unity amongst the different Christian churches, but his idea of interfaith goes beyond Christianity. In the next quote, Swedenborg says, it's plain that the church of the Lord is not here nor there, but that it's everywhere, both within those kingdoms where the Christian church is, and out of them, where people live according to the precepts of love. So even back in the 18th century, Swedenborg had a vision of interfaith. And then even more general than that, Swedenborg writes, God flows into every human being. with all God's divine love and all God's divine wisdom and all God's divine life. So you see, from interfaith among Christians, he moves to interfaith among different religions, and finally he moves to the point where God flows into every human being. So that's kind of the direction I want to be going with this talk. And now I'll talk a little bit about my impressions of interfaith. Often at interfaith organizations, we look for things that we share in common. And indeed, sometimes we even try to force harmony when it isn't really there. But why? Why, I ask, do we try to find things we all agree on? Isn't it better to recognize our differences and to affirm each other in our differences? Isn't it better than forcing commonalities that we may not even share? It's one thing to say there are differences among different religions. It's another to tolerate differences. But I want to affirm differences. As Swedenborg says, a form makes a unity more perfectly as its constituents are distinguishably different. It's more perfect when things are different. So I'll be talking about differences rather than commonalities. And in doing so, I will celebrate each individual's faith perspective or lack thereof and affirm it. You can't have interfaith unless you have different faith traditions all coming together. Otherwise, it isn't interfaith. This approach that I'm talking about works spiritually as well as socially. Let's consider the spiritual aspects first. How often have I heard all religions say the same thing? Or all religions are basically the same? Or there are so many commonalities that we share. Or we believe that too. I think back to my days in divinity school. We tried to come up with a prayer that everyone could participate in. And in order to make a prayer that everyone could say, the differences had to be eroded. So we took Jesus out of the prayer because other people couldn't pray with us if we kept Jesus' name in it. And given our goal, that is to say, making a prayer everyone could say, it's understandable that you might want to take Jesus out. But why make something we can all agree on to begin with? Isn't it better to recognize our differences? However, what I do want to say is important in interfaith things is the kind of climate in which we engage in interfaith. I will be speaking about what Buber calls an I-thou relationship. We need to have a safe space to talk about interfaith in. And Buber calls this I-thou, where we hear and we honor each other in our differences. And then we can look at this socially. How often have I heard people say, why don't they just adopt our ways? They all stay in their own communities. And I've even had a guy tell me once, this was in reference to African Americans, it's in their own best interest for them to adopt the ways of the majority race and culture. In other words, it's to their interest to conform to the dominant race and culture. I grew up in the US, and there we heard a lot about this word that we called a melting pot. The US was supposed to be a melting pot where differences would all blend together in some kind of lukewarm sameness. And words that I also heard were assimilation, enculturation, and adjusting. Here in Edmonton, though, I hear a different phrase. The catchword I hear here is pluralism. The social ideal that I've been running into a lot here in Edmonton is affirming different cultures rather than melting them together in one melting pot. All right, so those are some of the parameters that I'll be looking at this with. Let's look at some of the theoretical underpinnings of what I want to say. So first of all, how much do we share? Can we say there's an overarching principle that we all hold in common? Can we say there's one God, the same God that we all believe in with just different names? I'm not so sure. There was a philosopher of language by the name of Jean-Francois Lyotard who talked about an idea he called metanarratives. A meta-narrative is a shared story or a shared worldview or a shared belief system. And Lyotard asserted that today, society has fragmented so much that there is no unifying meta-narrative that we all share. And we're so fragmented from one another, in some places Lyotard says to speak is to fight. Now, the trouble with religion is that, like science, religion tends to claim universality, and they should. Religion is supposed to be ontological. It's supposed to explain the whole created world. Religions describe the way the universe is, how it came to be, and what our place in it is. Religion is supposed to describe God, and God's about as universal as you can get. But it's all the same God, right? There's only one God. Well, I'm not so sure we can even say that. I'm not so sure we would want to say that. As an example, my God is Jesus Christ. Well, my understanding of Judaism, and I believe Islam, is that there can be no image of God. And the human form, Jesus, is certainly an image of God. And even furthermore, the Greek Orthodox churches teach that since God came to earth in the flesh as Jesus, he took on a human body so we can paint pictures of Jesus. So in the Orthodox churches, you have this beautiful tradition of iconography, of paintings of Jesus. Well, this could never be the case in Judaism or Islam. And don't we do violence then, like Lyotard would say, to our particular belief systems if I were to claim that my Jesus is the same God as the Muslim Allah? I don't mean, though, to say we're divided due to diversity. What does join us is a willingness to engage in dialogue. And I think dialogue plays a central role in interfaith, but not dialogue that seeks consensus. How will I learn about Islam, for instance, if I'm listening all the time for where Islam agrees with my own Swedenborgian belief? If I'm listening for where they agree with me, I'm just having myself repeated in someone else, and I'm not learning anything about the other tradition. Now, there are biblical examples and theological examples that argue for the kind of pluralism I'm talking about. There is, in Israel, the period of the tribal leagues, when you had the 12 tribes, or clans, maybe, of Israel. And there's that famous quote from Judges 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes. The 12 tribes were distinguishably different from one another. They were united by family, by a shared history, and by shared worship of God. And the binding forces, socially, were the same binding forces that held them together theologically, that is to say, worship of their one God and the laws that God gave them, especially the covenant code, which is in Exodus 21 through 23. So the 12 tribes were distinct from each other and yet united by their common adherence to the one God. But the distinctness of each tribal unit and each individual who did what was right in their own eyes was remembered throughout Israelite history, and it was considered by some to be a kind of golden age of Israel. And from the point of views of the elders of Israel, when they clamored to have a king, it was seen as a rejection of God. God was the binding force between these loosely united tribes, not a king. We find this in the book of Samuel, where God tells Samuel, "They have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being a king over them," when they wanted to have their own king. And even King David, when he assumed the throne, was careful to receive a blessing from all the 12 tribes. In fact, he was anointed 3 times, once by Samuel, and once by the 10 northern tribes, and once by the 2 southern tribes. So King David honored the tradition of the separate 12 tribes, E Pluribus Unum, in ancient Israel. And we find this idea in the Christian scriptures too. Paul uses the metaphor of the human body to talk about the different gifts each individual brings to the one Spirit of Christ. And I have a quote from him there in your handout from Paul's letter to the Corinthians 12, 1 through 31. And rather than me read it, I would like to ask for a volunteer from y'all to read that quote. It's in the handout, Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Do we have a volunteer to do the reading so that I'm not doing it? All right.
It starts with, now there are varieties.
Yeah.
Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another gifts of healing by the same Spirit. To another the working of miracles. To another prophecy. To another discernment of spirits. To another various kinds of tongues. To another the interpretation of tongues. All these are activated by one and the same Spirit, who allots to each one individually just as the Spirit chooses. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is in Christ. For in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. Indeed, the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less part of a body. And if the ear would say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less part of the body. And if the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing be? And if the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor the head to the feet, I have no need of you. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. Now, you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. And God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then deeds of power, then gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, various kinds of tongues. And are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess the gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? But strive for the greater grace.
Okay, a nice metaphor that says we need variety. If everything was a nose, where would the ear be? Now, Emanuel Swedenborg builds on Paul's metaphor of the body. For Swedenborg, heaven is arranged in the form of a human body, and people in heaven find their place according to their disposition. So brilliant people are in the eyes, loving people are in the heart. Let me see, I have these all listed. People who discern different qualities are in the nose, because the nose distinguishes things. People who are in the ears are obedient, because you hear and do, and so on with all the organs of the body. So while Paul uses this as a metaphor for human relations in the body of Christ, Swedenborg actually makes this the way heaven is arranged according to the human body. And again, it's the idea that pluralism perfects things rather than waters down and broadens things. So let's look at some of those Swedenborg quotes. I only have two. First of all, there's the quote from Heaven and Hell, number 65. Swedenborg writes, "Since heaven in its entirety does reflect a single individual and is in fact the divine spiritual person in its greatest form and image, heaven is therefore differentiated into members and parts like a person, and these are given similar names. Angels know what member one community is or another, and they say that this community is the member of the head, province of the head, or this is the province of the chest, or this is the province of the genitals, and so on." And furthermore, there's another quote from Swedenborg. "Further still, heaven is where the Lord is recognized, trusted, and loved." Now listen to this. "The different ways he is worshipped do not cause harm, but bring benefit, because they're a source of heaven's perfection. A perfect whole is formed from a variety of elements. When a whole does arise from a variety of elements, and the elements are in a perfected form in which each associates with the next like a series like a sympathetic friend, then it has a perfect quality. Heaven is then a single whole composed of a variety of elements arranged in a most perfect form." Okay, so those are some theological sources that argue for perfection being in variety, not sameness. And then there's the story of the elephant and the three blind men that come to us from the Jain tradition. Does everybody know that story? Let me see. No, not everybody knows it. I'm going to say it really quickly. Three blind men come to an elephant, and one of them comes to the trunk, and he says, "Well, this is an interesting creature. It's like a big fat hose." And another one's at the leg, and he goes, "No, this creature's rather like a tree trunk." And another one is at the elephant's ear, and he says, "No, this creature is like a big broad leaf." So each one of them had a part of the elephant, but not the whole. And each one of these guys was right. The guy at the trunk was right. The elephant's trunk is like a hose. The guy at the leg was right. The elephant is like a tree trunk. And the guy at the ear was right. The elephant's ear is like a leaf. And it seems to me that this story captures where we all are in the issue of differing faiths and different religions. Every one of us is finite, but God is infinite. So none of us have the whole story about God. And reflecting on the elephant story, different expressions of God, different religions, add to the whole picture. They don't diminish or weaken the whole picture. This understanding of religion goes for practice as well as belief, because some religions emphasize ritual, whereas other religions, like my own, emphasize belief. For instance, from what I know about Hinduism, lighting a candle for the god Agni is part of their religious expression. Or smearing clarified butter on a Shiva linga is how they worship, some of the Hindus. Or bringing sweets or flowers to a temple and receiving sweets back in return is part of their ritual. Well, in my religion, we talk a lot about understanding truth, becoming loving people, and showing this in ethical behavior. So the way we act is how we worship in my tradition. And then other religions still talk about the sacred calendar. And I might be wrong about this, but it's my understanding that in Judaism, many of the festivals, according to the calendar, form central or pivotal roles in the way religion is expressed in Judaism. And in fact, it's my understanding that even the Bible is read in the course of the sacred calendar. Different portions of the Bible are read at different times of the year. We don't even have really a religious calendar in my religion. We have Christmas and Easter, and that's about it. But so for us, the sacred calendar doesn't form a very important role, nor does ritual, but rather belief and behavior. So you see, different practices are also part of the interfaith expression, not just different beliefs. And as I've been arguing, the greater the diversity in perspectives, the greater and the better we'll understand the whole elephant. All right, I'm going to conclude then by looking at some practical applications. I've already mentioned the political climate in the US and the fact that it's spreading into Europe and even up here into Canada. Now more than ever, I think that we need organizations like the Edmonton Interfaith Center. And I think we need to be evangelists. We need to spread our gospel, our good news, that people of different faiths, different nationalities, and different cultures actually benefit from diversity. I remember growing up in an all-white suburb of the Detroit area. We would get together on weekends and lean against Don Range's cars and try to crack jokes with each other, most of which weren't very funny and most of which I didn't even laugh at. And that was a typical weekend for me in white suburbia. But look at where I am now, Edmonton. I remember when I first got here, I noticed in Starbucks there were people sitting at different tables, talking in different languages, you know. I have been taking Tai Chi classes at Jihong Tai Chi Academy, and now I'm going to acupuncture treatment. I enjoy Vietnamese food, Indian cuisine, pierogies, pad thai, burritos, mokkaheti, lasagna, hamburgers, chez McDonald's. Oops, I just made a plug. among the many other options Edmonton has to offer. We have ethnic festivals like Heritage Days or the different ethnic festivals at the city center in the summertime. And my musical interests are ecumenical also. I first heard Sikh sacred music at a temple where the Edmonton Interfaith Center was invited. And I heard the same genre of music at a Mac's convenience store where a Sikh employee was piping in the music through the intercom. Well, this intrigued me, and I soon downloaded some Sikh music from another company, and a friend of mine from India gave me a disc of Sikh sacred music. And of course, now that I'm going for acupuncture treatments, I've downloaded some traditional Chinese music onto my iPod, and I enjoy it. So, as you might have finally realized, my point is that culture, religion, and society benefits from diversity. It's not a threat. It doesn't water down our own belief system. Rather, it perfects us individually and culturally. And with that, I'll wrap up my part of the talk. So thanks for your attention.